Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into a quiet, buzzing world that you probably never thought about before. Ancient Egyptian beekeeping. Picture yourself trudging through the thick, fertile banks of the Nile, the air heavy with the earthy scent of wet mud and the soft rustle of papyrus reeds swaying in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, hidden among date palms and acacia trees, tiny golden bees hum busily around their nests. You might think, okay, bees, cool, but how can this possibly be boring enough to help me fall asleep? Well, fair warning, you probably won't survive this, because once you start noticing how important, intricate, and downright fascinating the ancient relationship between Egyptians and bees was, your mind might just buzz wide awake instead. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments so I know where in the world we're all drifting off together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the Nile Valley as it was over 4,000 years ago. The land is lush, a sharp contrast to the dry desert just beyond. It's springtime, and the floodwaters have recently receded, leaving behind thick, rich soil, natural fertilizer that makes this one of the most fertile places on Earth. You hear the distant croaks of frogs and the occasional splash of a hippo disturbing the water. The air smells faintly of wildflowers, moist earth, and, if you focus, a subtle sweetness carried on the breeze. That sweetness, the signature scent of nectar, drawn from a tapestry of blooming plants, fig trees, acacias, date palms, all flowering in a carefully timed orchestra dictated by the seasons. This environment is a paradise for bees. You can almost hear their gentle hum threading through the reeds and trees, a soft backdrop to the greatest symphony of nature. Bees are nature's tireless workers here, flitting from blossom to blossom, collecting nectar to turn into honey. But these aren't just any bees. They are the original players in a story that humans would soon start to shape. Historians still argue whether the wild bees of the Nile Valley were native, or if some species migrated here as the climate changed over millennia. Either way, the presence of these buzzing pollinators created an essential link between the plants and the agricultural potential of the region. Without bees, the crops that would eventually feed the Egyptian civilization might have struggled. It's an early example of how the natural world and human life were interwoven. Though the Egyptians probably didn't think about it quite so ecologically. At this point, beekeeping was not yet a thing. Bees lived wild in tree hollows, under rocky ledges, and in crevices of mud cliffs. Their secret lives were known only to the keenest observers, possibly those few early gatherers who collected honeycombs for food. Imagine watching the bees carefully, learning their patterns, maybe daring to snatch a comb when the colony was distracted, or the sun made the bees sluggish. It was a dangerous, smoky business. One wrong move, and you'd be chasing your itchy, stinging friends through the reeds. But this was the seed of a human fascination with honey and beeswax that would soon grow. For the Egyptians, honey was far more than a sweet treat. It was a symbol of life's sweetness, a sacred substance gifted by the gods, and a practical resource woven deeply into daily life. We'll get to honey's many roles soon, but for now, let yourself drift into the stillness of this ancient landscape where the buzz of bees is a quiet but constant companion. Let your mind picture the reeds, the flowering trees, the slow-moving river reflecting the orange glow of dawn. The world was waking up, and so were humans. slowly learning how to live alongside their buzzing neighbors. There's something calming about the slow, steady hum of bees. Maybe it's the rhythm, maybe the promise of something golden and sweet at the end of their journey. Either way, you're already part of the story. Carried gently on the Nile breeze as it whispers through the reeds and carries the soft scent of nectar and mud into your dreams. You're still standing on the banks of the Nile, feeling the soft, damp earth beneath your feet and the warmth of the sun gently rising above the horizon. Now, let's talk honey, but not just any honey. The kind the ancient Egyptians treasured so much, it was practically a sacred elixir. Honey for them wasn't just a sticky, sweet snack like you grab on your morning toast. No, it was a treasure more valuable than gold in many ways. You can almost imagine a merchant carefully balancing a small jar of golden honey on a scale, as if it weighed as much as a chunk of precious metal. Sweetness, medicine, currency, honey wore many hats in ancient Egypt. Honey was everywhere, in the homes of commoners, in the grand temples dedicated to the gods, and even in the tombs of pharaohs. It was used to sweeten foods, sure, but it was also an essential ingredient in religious rituals and offerings. Picture a priest carefully pouring honey onto an altar, the thick liquid catching the flickering candlelight as a chant rises in the temple air. This wasn't just about taste. Honey was believed to be a divine substance, one that could bridge the gap between mortals and gods. You probably didn't know that honey is one of the few foods that never truly spoils. Archaeologists found jars of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs, still perfectly edible after thousands of years. So, when you imagine those royal banquets or sacred offerings, you can picture honey as a kind of eternal sweetness, like a liquid time capsule. That's a fact that makes modern food science marvel at ancient preservation techniques. But honey's role didn't stop there. It was medicine too. Egyptians used honey as a wound dressing, applying it to cuts and burns because of its natural antibacterial properties. You can almost see a healer in a dusty village applying sticky honey to a scrape, wrapping it carefully to protect the injury. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians truly understood the science behind honey's healing powers, or if it was more of a lucky discovery. Either way, it worked. Even more intriguing is how honey was used as currency. Farmers and laborers were sometimes paid in honey, and it was one of the goods traded extensively along the Nile and beyond. Imagine walking through a bustling marketplace, filled with the calls of vendors hawking their goods, bundles of papyrus, woven baskets, jars of honey, and blocks of beeswax. Honey was such a prized commodity that it often featured in contracts and tax records. You might think of honey as just sweet, but in ancient Egypt, it was a symbol of wealth and prosperity. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Did you know that honey was also used in the process of embalming? The sticky sweetness helped preserve the body and prevent decay, making it a key ingredient in the mummification ritual. You've heard of spices and resins, but honey was part of that sacred toolkit too. The Egyptians seemed to believe that the preservation of the body was essential for the soul's journey, and honey's preserving properties made it a holy component. Honey was even featured in some of their earliest poetry and hymns. Imagine the soft, rhythmic chanting of a scribe as he compares the beauty of the pharaoh's reign to the sweetness of honey. A poetic metaphor that still hums quietly through history. It's a beautiful, almost tangible link between the natural world and human culture. So now, as you imagine this golden liquid flowing gently from ancient hives into clay pots, remember that honey was never just about taste. It was medicine, magic, money, and metaphor all wrapped into one sticky, sweet package. The Egyptians didn't just eat honey, they lived by it, worshipped it, and celebrated it. That's one buzzing relationship worth savoring. You're still drifting softly along the banks of the Nile, the hum of bees blending with the gentle rustle of papyrus. Now it's time to get a little closer, to see how the ancient Egyptians took the next big step from wild honey gathering to actual beekeeping. Archaeologists have been piecing together the evidence for decades, and it turns out the earliest Egyptian beekeepers were quietly shaping an art form that would buzz through history. Imagine walking through a dusty excavation site in Upper Egypt. The sun blazes down as you crouch near a pile of broken clay, cylinders long, narrow pots stacked carefully in rows. At first glance, they look like ordinary pottery shards, but experts identify them as some of the oldest known beehives, dating back over 4,500 years. These weren't just random pots. They were carefully designed vessels made to house bees. A human attempt to invite the wild insects inside and keep them there. The hives were made from fired clay, with small entrances carved into one side to let bees in and out. The Egyptians understood that bees needed a safe, sheltered home to produce honey reliably. So these pots were stacked horizontally in rows, like bricks in a wall. It's a surprisingly clever design when you think about it. Perfect mix of human engineering and respect for the natural habits of bees. Historians still argue whether these early hives were modeled after natural bee nests or if the Egyptians invented the designs from scratch. Some suggest the shape might mimic hollow tree trunks or rocky crevices where wild bees nested, while others think the Egyptians innovated entirely new forms. Based on observations and trial and error, beekeeping was not a casual hobby for these ancient folks. It was a serious enterprise, essential for securing honey and wax supplies. To get honey from the hives, they developed techniques that might make a modern beekeeper smile or cringe. Think about smoke. Even today, beekeepers use smoke to calm bees before opening hives. The Egyptians likely discovered this through experience, perhaps by accidentally burning nearby fields or reeds and noticing how bees became less aggressive when smoke filled the air. Simple, effective, and a little bit smoky sweet, but the tools they used were simpler than modern smokers. Maybe bundles of damp papyrus or herbs were burned slowly to create just enough smoke to calm the bees. You can almost picture a beekeeper gently lifting a clay hive from its stack, carefully puffing smoke inside, then prying open the pot to harvest the precious honeycomb. Interestingly, some pottery fragments show traces of beeswax and honey residues, confirming their role as hives. This physical evidence connects the past with the present, showing the continuity of a craft that still hums today. It's like holding a tangible piece of buzzing history in your hands. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit. Some scholars suggest that the ancient Egyptians may have experimented with stingless bees as well as the common honeybee. Stingless bees don't bite, making them much easier to handle, but they produce less honey. However, concrete proof remains elusive, and the debate continues in scholarly circles. Stingless bees are more common in tropical regions, so it's possible that both species played a role in early Egyptian beekeeping. Beekeeping wasn't just about catching honey, it was a sophisticated interaction with nature. The Egyptians recognized the life cycle of bees, the importance of protecting the queen, and the rhythms of the hive. This is remarkable given the lack of written manuals or textbooks. They passed knowledge down through apprenticeships and hands-on experiencer, buzzing, classroom of nature's lessons. So as you imagine this ancient apiary picture, row after row of these clay hives, neatly stacked along shaded walls, with beekeepers' hands moving gently through the smoke and honeycomb. The buzz of bees is a soft soundtrack to a scene where human ingenuity meets nature's miracle. It's a moment where you realize that even thousands of years ago, people were deeply connected to these tiny creatures whose work shaped the world. The sun hangs lower now, casting longer shadows over the Nile's edge. And as you lean against a sun-warmed mud brick wall, you notice something unexpected. The air smells faintly of honey and something a bit waxy, smooth but stubbornly solid. To the touch, beeswax, that humble golden material made by bees from their own bodies, was an ancient Egyptian secret far beyond the sticky sweetness of honey. Imagine running your fingers over a small carved figurine or a delicate cosmetic container, polished, smooth, and glowing softly in the fading light. Beeswax was the secret ingredient behind these treasures. It was the unsung hero of Egyptian life, used in everything from cosmetics to medicine, even to magic and mummification. This waxy substance was like the Swiss Army knife of the ancient world, versatile and surprisingly vital. One of the more mainstream facts here is that beeswax was an essential ingredient in Egyptian cosmetics. Women and men alike applied kohl and other makeup mixed with beeswax to their faces, partly for aesthetics, but also for protection. The wax helped the pigments stick to the skin and shielded eyes from the harsh sun and dust, sort of like ancient sunscreen with a bit more style. You can almost picture Egyptian ladies sitting in courtyards, carefully smoothing a black paste along their eyelids, the beeswax holding everything in place, while gossip buzzed softly like the bees outside. But beeswax's role wasn't limited to beauty. It was also a key player in medicine. Egyptian healers mixed it with resins, herbs, and oils to create bombs and salves, used for treating wounds and skin ailments. The wax's natural properties helped keep these mixtures from melting too quickly in the hot sun and gave them a smooth texture for easy application. The ancient Egyptians might not have understood the chemical reasons, but they sure knew the practical value. And then there's the most fascinating and somewhat eerie use. Mummification. Beeswax was used in the embalming process to coat and seal bodies, preserving them for the afterlife. You've probably heard about the complex rituals involving spices and linen wrappings. But beeswax was the secret agent in keeping the body intact, preventing decay and odor. Historians still argue whether beeswax's use was primarily practical to stop moisture loss and bacteria, or whether it also had symbolic spiritual significance. Maybe it was both. Either way, beeswax was part of the sacred toolkit that bridged life and eternity. A quirky fringe fact is that some researchers suggest that beeswax was even used as a kind of ancient glue or sealant for papyrus scrolls or wooden boxes. Imagine scribes carefully sealing a document with a thin layer of wax, almost like an early version of the wax seals kings and queens later used in Europe. It's a detail easy to overlook, but one that adds to the surprising versatility of beeswax. You might be wondering how the Egyptians harvested beeswax without damaging their hives or harming the bees too much. Well, the answer is a mix of patience and ingenuity. Beekeepers learned to carefully cut pieces of honeycomb from the hives, separating the wax from the honey-filled cells. The wax was then melted down in clay vessels and filtered to remove impurities. This process required skill, as overheating could ruin the wax's quality. It's a delicate art, akin to goldsmithing, but with sticky, buzzing assistance. Let yourself imagine the warmth of those workshops, where clay pots bubble softly over, small fires releasing sweet, smoky aromas as honey and wax are transformed into usable materials. Nearby, artists and healers prepare their mixtures, carefully adding beeswax to perfumes, bombs, and even the fragrant oils used in temple ceremonies. So, beeswax was no mere byproduct of beekeeping. It was a prized resource that touched almost every aspect of Egyptian life, from the shimmer on a noble's cheek to the preservation of a beloved pharaoh's body. Beeswax was a silent golden thread weaving its way through the culture, science, and spirituality of ancient Egypt. The sun's heat has mellowed to a gentle warmth as you stroll deeper into this ancient world, and now your eyes trace the simple yet ingenious tools that made Egyptian beekeeping possible. These aren't the high-tech gadgets you might imagine. Today, no fancy smokers with digital timers or high-end protective suits, but clever, humble implements that speak of hands-on knowledge and careful observation. Picture yourself holding a thin, flat wooden stick, worn smooth by generations of beekeepers, or a woven basket designed not just for carrying but for calming the restless swarm. Beekeeping in ancient Egypt relied on a handful of tools and techniques that balanced patience with practicality. Smoke was king among these, as you might remember from earlier sections. But instead of a metal smoker, beekeepers burned damp papyrus reeds or herbs like thyme to create a mild smoke. This smoke helped lull the bees into a docile state, making the hive easier to open without triggering a defensive swarm. The smell wasn't exactly a spa treatment, but it was effective. You can almost hear the soft crackle of burning reeds as the beekeeper approaches a row of clay hives, smoke curling lazily in the still air. With practiced hands, they gently pry, open the pots using wooden tools, perhaps a small lever or a flat blade, designed to wedge under the lid without crushing the fragile beeswax comb inside. It's a delicate balance. Too rough, and the bees get angry. Too slow, and the honey might spoil or be stolen by other animals. Speaking of animals, the Egyptians also faced challenges from unwanted guests. Imagine crafty little mongooses or birds eyeing those sweet honey stores. To protect their precious hives, beekeepers sometimes elevated them on stands or placed them near human settlements where larger predators were deterred. There's even some evidence that they used natural repellents, like specific herbs, to keep pests at bay. An ancient version of integrated pest management. An intriguing historical debate revolves around how the Egyptians managed the queen bee's control within the hive. Modern beekeepers often manipulate the queen to maximize honey production, but it's unclear how much the Egyptians interfered with the hive's natural order. Some suggest they left the queen largely undisturbed, focusing instead on harvesting surplus honey, while others argue that they might have had ways to encourage colony growth or even swap queens. It's one of those buzzing mysteries still debated by scholars. One quirky tidbit: some art from the period depicts beekeepers wearing veils or simple head coverings, but protective gear was likely minimal compared to today. You can imagine a beekeeper casually brushing bees away with a palm leaf or waving smoke in sweeping motions, rather than relying on full body suits. It must have required nerves of steel or a high pain tolerance for stings. Harvesting was an event in itself, often timed carefully to avoid the hottest parts of the day or the rainy season. Beekeepers watched the weather, the bloom cycles, and even the phases of the moon, understanding intuitively when the bees were most productive. This kind of environmental attunement shows a sophisticated relationship between humans and their buzzing partners. After the honey was extracted, the honeycomb wasn't wasted. Leftover wax was collected and melted down, as we talked about earlier, and even the empty hives were maintained or replaced when needed. This maintenance cycle was crucial for sustainable beekeeping, and hints at an early sense of ecological stewardship. So, as you picture yourself stepping back in time, you see not just the buzzing bees, but the hands that cared for them, the tools that made the work possible, and the slow, deliberate rituals that surrounded honey harvesting. It's a world where simple tools met natural wisdom, a harmony of human ingenuity and nature's rhythm. Asterisk, the golden light of late afternoon softens the Nile's edges as you drift deeper into the Egyptian world. And now it's time to unpack the buzzing symbolism that surrounded bees. You might think of bees as simple insects, but for the Egyptians, these tiny creatures carried immense symbolic weight. Bees weren't just producers of honey and wax. They were messengers of royalty, symbols of order, and even divine creatures, born of the sun god's tears. One mainstream historical fact is that bees were closely linked to the pharaoh himself. The ancient Egyptian word for bee-bit was part of the royal title of Lower Egypt's kings. In fact, the bee symbol appeared on royal insignia, especially those connected to the title he of the sedge and the bee, representing the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. This shows how deeply bees were embedded in the very identity of Egyptian rulership. Imagine a crown adorned with tiny bee motifs, each one representing the pharaoh's power over the land and its creatures. The bee symbolized not only hard work and productivity, but also social order qualities essential to the smooth functioning of the kingdom. Historians still argue whether the prominence of bees in royal symbolism originated from their agricultural importance or if it had a more mythological root tied to divine authority. Probably both. Bees also appeared in Egyptian mythology as creatures born directly from the tears of the sun god Ra. Legend has it that when Ra wept, his tears fell to the earth and transformed into bees, bringing sweetness and life wherever they went. This myth elevated bees from mere insects to divine beings, linking them to the cycle of life, death, and rebirth that was central to Egyptian belief. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some ancient texts describe bees as little kings and their hives as miniature kingdoms, ruled by a queen who was sometimes mythologically associated with the goddess Neith. This divine connection blurred the lines between the natural world and the spiritual, making bees sacred ambassadors of cosmic order. Bees even had a role in funeral rituals. The Egyptians believed that bees could help carry messages to the afterlife, guiding souls on their journey. Honey and wax were often placed in tombs to assist the deceased, symbolizing nourishment and protection in the next world. It's a fascinating blend of the practical and the mystical. You might wonder how such tiny creatures came to symbolize such big ideas. Perhaps it was their social organization, bees working together in a perfectly ordered community, that inspired Egyptians to view them as models for human society. The hive was a metaphor for the kingdom, where everyone had a role, and the pharaoh was the unifying force. So, as you close your eyes and picture the slow hum of bees against the backdrop of temple walls and royal courts, remember that these little insects were far more than producers of honey. They were powerful symbols of life, leadership, and divine connection, buzzing threads woven into the very fabric of ancient Egyptian culture. The fading light shifts as you follow the gentle curve of the Nile, and now your attention turns to the hives themselves, those humble homes of honey, clay vessels transformed by human hands into buzzing sanctuaries. Egyptian hive design wasn't random, it evolved carefully over centuries, reflecting a blend of practical needs, natural observation, and perhaps a dash of aesthetic sense. Early hives were typically made from fired clay, shaped into long cylinders with a small hole near one end for the bees to enter and exit. Imagine rows of these clay cylinders stacked horizontally along shaded walls or narrow courtyards, each one housing a colony busy at work. This design was practical. It protected the bees from the harsh desert sun and sudden Nile storms while allowing easy access for the beekeeper. Interestingly, some of the most detailed examples of ancient hive designs come from tomb paintings and reliefs, where artisans captured beekeeping scenes with surprising accuracy. One famous depiction shows a beekeeper carefully removing honeycombs from a cylindrical hive, surrounded by blossoming trees and curious onlookers. These images offer a glimpse not only of the hive's shape, but of the social context around beekeeping. Historians still argue whether the cylindrical shape was inspired by natural bee nests or developed purely as a human innovation. Some suggest it mimicked hollow tree trunks, which wild bees favored, while others think it was a convenient shape for stacking and storage. Whatever the origin, the design clearly worked well enough to last centuries. As Egyptian technology advanced, there's evidence of hives made from woven materials, like reeds or straw, coated with mud or clay for durability. These woven hives might have been lighter and easier to produce, but possibly less protective against the elements. It's a bit like comparing a modern plastic beehive to a traditional wooden one. Each has pros and cons. A quirky tidbit is that some researchers propose that ancient Egyptians may have used movable frames or partitions inside hives, allowing them to harvest honey without destroying the entire colony. This idea is debated, and direct evidence is scarce, but if true, it would be a remarkable early precursor to modern beekeeping techniques. The location of hives was another consideration, placing them near flowering plants but safe from floods and predators was essential. The Egyptians were keen observers of the landscape, choosing spots where bees could thrive and produce maximum honey. They understood the importance of environmental harmony long before the phrase sustainable agriculture was coined. In terms of maintenance, beekeepers would regularly inspect the hives, repairing cracks or replacing damaged clay pots. This upkeep shows a dedication not just to harvesting, but to preserving the bees' habitat, a kind of ancient eco-consciousness. You might imagine a beekeeper gently cleaning a hive, chatting softly to calm the bees, and watching as the colony buzzed busily inside. As you picture these clay and woven cylinders lined neatly under the Egyptian sun, remember they were more than mere containers. They were carefully crafted homes, designed to protect and sustain one of nature's most fascinating communities. The hive was a microcosm of order, productivity, and delicate balance, a buzzing testament to human ingenuity, meeting natural wonder, asterisk, the day deepens, and you feel the cool Nile breeze as you turn your thoughts to the subtle but vital partnership between beekeeping and Egyptian agriculture. Bees weren't just producing honey for the banquet table or the tombs. They were also essential players in the pollination of crops that sustained the entire civilization. Imagine the vast fields of emmer, wheat, flax, and barley stretching under the Egyptian sun, each plant's survival quietly depending on the tiny wings of busy bees. Pollination is the unseen backbone of agriculture, and the ancient Egyptians whether consciously or through generations of observation, understood that bees were more than honey makers. They were life makers. Crops like cucumbers, melons, and date palms all benefited from pollination, which increased yields and food security. Without bees, these essential plants might have struggled or failed entirely. Historians still argue how much intentional the Egyptians were in linking beekeeping to crop pollination. Did they realize the bees' role beyond honey production? Or was it an accidental benefit that only later gained appreciation? Either way, the presence of managed bee colonies near fields would have enhanced agricultural productivity. The Nile's annual flooding played a key role in this agricultural cycle, depositing nutrient-rich silt on the farmlands. As the floodwaters receded, flowering plants emerged, providing forage for the bees at precisely the right time. This natural timing allowed beekeepers to plan their honey harvests to coincide with peak nectar flow. The bees, in turn, ensured the success of vital crops, creating a quietly efficient ecological loop. One quirky tidbit is that some evidence suggests Egyptians may have intentionally planted certain flowering plants near hives to encourage bee activity, an early form of companion planting. Imagine a small garden of wildflowers and herbs buzzing with bees, strategically placed near a cluster of hives to boost nectar availability. It's a simple idea, but surprisingly sophisticated for the time. The connection between bees and agriculture also had economic implications. Better crop yields meant more surplus for trade and storage, and honey was both a product and a symbol of agricultural success. The prosperity of the land and the honey harvest were linked, a fact not lost on Egyptian society. Beekeeping also complemented other agricultural practices. The byproducts of bees, such as wax, supported toolmaking, art, and ritual, all integral to a thriving culture that revolved around the land and its gifts. Beeswax was used to waterproof baskets and seal jars, protecting food stores and craft materials. It's fascinating to consider that the quiet hum of bees was woven into the very fabric of Egyptian farming life. Without the bees' tireless work, the fields might have been less bountiful, the people less nourished, and history itself a little different. The delicate balance of nature and human ingenuity was buzzing right there along the Nile. So, as you drift gently through this ancient agricultural landscape, imagine the soft buzz of bees traveling from flower to flower, their tiny bodies carrying pollen that would birth the next season's bread and cloth. It's a partnership that speaks quietly but powerfully of life's interconnectedness, ancient and enduring. Asterisk. The golden light begins to soften as you wander now into bustling marketplaces and the buzzing trade routes of ancient Egypt, where honey and beeswax weren't just farm products but valuable commodities that traveled far beyond the Nile's banks. Imagine a lively market scene filled with colorful stalls shaded by palm fronds, merchants calling out their wares, and the sweet scent of honey mingling with spices and incense. Honey was a form of currency, a prized gift, and a tradable good, buzzing its way through the complex web of ancient economies. Honey and beeswax were highly sought after not just within Egypt, but also in neighboring regions like Nubia, the Levant, and beyond. Traders knew that these products were precious, both for their practical uses and their cultural value. Picture caravans crossing desert sands, or boats gliding down the Nile, loaded with jars of golden honey and blocks of wax destined for temples, workshops, and wealthy households. One mainstream fact is that Egyptian scribes meticulously recorded honey and wax in tax documents, trade manifests, and gift lists. These records show just how important bee products were in the economy, often exchanged for grain, livestock, or luxury goods. Honey was more than food. It was a symbol of wealth and social status, and trading it required trust and careful handling. Historians still debate how regulated the honey trade was. Was it tightly controlled by the state, or more of a free market affair? Some scholars argue that the pharaoh's government oversaw honey production and distribution to maintain quality and supply for religious offerings. Others believe local beekeepers and merchants managed most trade independently. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, a buzzing marketplace of cooperation and competition. A quirky tidbit you might enjoy: Egyptian honey was sometimes mixed with spices and herbs to create unique flavored varieties, much like modern infused honeys. Traders would offer these special blends as luxurious gifts or ritual offerings, adding another layer of complexity to honey's cultural role. Imagine tasting a jar of honey infused with cinnamon or frankincense, a sweet spice journey in every drop. Beeswax, meanwhile, was traded extensively for use in crafts and rituals. Artisans used it to create molds for metalwork, to seal papyrus, scrolls, and even to lubricate moving parts in simple machines. Wax was as versatile as honey, but often more valuable in bulk trade. Trade routes carried honey and wax along the Nile, into desert oases, and out toward the Mediterranean coast. This trade helped spread Egyptian beekeeping techniques and symbolic meanings to other cultures. It's a buzzing example of how a humble insect's product can influence far-flung civilizations. As you imagine the market's noise fading into the gentle hum of bees, think of how honey and wax carried the scent of the Nile's fertile lands far and wide. Each jar was a little golden ambassador, a sweet story traveling across deserts and seas. Asterisk, asterisk, the sun is dipping low, painting the Nile's waters in soft amber hues. And now you find yourself peeking behind the scenes at the people who made beekeeping possible, the workers, the laborers, and the specialists whose buzzing world shaped ancient Egyptian society in unexpected ways. Beekeeping wasn't just a hobby or a royal enterprise. It was a complex craft embedded within the social fabric, requiring knowledge, patience, and skill. Imagine a small village by the river where beekeeping was a family affair. Perhaps it was the men who tended the hives, carrying pots of smoke and wooden tools, while women processed the honey and beeswax into products for sale or ritual use. Or maybe it was the other way around, or a mixture of both. The truth is, historians still argue about the social roles in beekeeping. Was it mainly men's work, women's work, or something shared? Evidence is patchy, but it's clear that craft involves specialized knowledge passed down through generations. In larger centers, beekeepers might have been organized into guild-like groups or attached to temple estates, where honey was produced on a larger scale for offerings and royal use. These specialists enjoyed a certain status for their skills, but they also faced the dangers of the craft bee stings, weather hazards, and the constant risk of losing a hive. You can imagine the quiet respect and camaraderie among these workers, bonded by their shared buzzing responsibilities. There's a quirky fringe theory that some beekeepers were actually considered sacred or magical practitioners, given the symbolic power of bees and honey. Some texts hint that those who could talk to bees or handle them without harm were seen as blessed or gifted, blending beekeeping with spirituality. It's an intriguing idea, though hard to prove definitively. Children might have also been involved in simple tasks, collecting wax scraps, helping carry supplies, or learning the rhythms of bee behavior through observation. This hands-on learning was crucial in passing down beekeeping knowledge in a society without formal schooling systems for such trades. Socially, honey and wax were woven into many rituals and celebrations, so the beekeeper's work was tied closely to the religious calendar and community life. Their success affected not just their own livelihoods, but the prosperity of temples and towns. A bad honey harvest might mean fewer offerings to the gods, or less income for the community. So, as the evening cools, picture a small group gathered around a fire, sharing stories of the day's work with bees buzzing nearby. They're part of a long chain of human-bee partnership that blends labor, skill, and a touch of reverence, subtle but essential thread in Egypt's ancient tapestry. The air is thick and warm, carrying that low, vibrating hum you've been hearing all afternoon. You can feel it through your sandals, through the soft dust of the path, as if the ground itself has decided to join in the music of wings. You've been wandering along the edge of a cluster of hives, those long, horizontal cylinders of baked mud, their ends sealed except for a few neat openings, when you start to notice the rhythm of it. The bees are moving in waves, surging out and swirling back like the tide if the tide were made of tiny, determined insects. This is the season everyone in the village quietly anticipates, not in the way they wait for harvest or the arrival of a trade boat, but in the way you might anticipate a relative who's charming but unpredictable. Swarming season is both promise and headache. The promise: more hives, more honey, more wax. The headache: trying to make sure your bees don't just up and leave, taking their golden stockpile with them. You stand next to a beekeeper, his linen kilt dusty from hours of slow work, watching him tilt his head toward the air, as if he can hear some subtle shift in tone. He doesn't look rushed. In fact, he moves slower than you'd think possible for someone whose livelihood could, at any moment, take flight. He's watching for the signs: the restless drifting at the hive's entrance, the clustering of workers around the queen's chosen spot, the way the guard bees seem distracted. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians actively practiced swarm control as you'd know it today, or whether they simply followed and recaptured escaped colonies. The record's papyrus scraps and carved scenes are just vague enough to leave that mystery. What's certain is that they had the patience of saints and the observational skills of someone who's been staring at bees for decades. You follow him as he approaches a hive, smoke pot in hand. The smoke is not to harm the bees, more like a gentle suggestion. It makes them think there's a fire nearby, nudging them to fill their bellies with honey in case they have to relocate, which in turn makes them too pleasantly stuffed to sting anyone. You catch the faint scent of burning dried dung and papyrus stalks with a bitter edge. Not exactly a candle shop smell, but calming in its own way. He cracks open the end of the hive with a careful push of a wooden wedge, peering inside. The air shifts, carrying the warm, sweet scent of honey and wax to you. It's heavier than you expect, almost drinkable. Inside, combs hang in neat rows, glistening in the dim light. You spot the queen larger, slower, moving with a kind of lazy authority. She's the reason this whole buzzing civilization exists, and also the reason the beekeeper will spend the next several days coaxing her into a new hive before she decides to lead her workers off into the reeds. And here's the quirky part: some keepers in this era believed they could convince a swarm to settle simply by singing or chanting softly to it. You imagine this guy standing in a cloud of bees, mumbling what might be an ancient lullaby, Whether the bees respond to the sound, or just the calm of his presence, is anyone's guess. The air grows louder for a moment more, bees emerging, clustering into a dense, living ball around a nearby tamarisk branch. This is the swarm's staging ground, their little pre-departure lounge. You can feel the temperature rise just from the mass of bodies. The beekeeper gently brushes at the cluster with a bundle of twigs, nudging them into a woven basket. The sound changes again, a slightly muffled hum as the basket fills. You notice he's not wearing any sort of veil or gloves, just relying on that practiced calm, slow movements. And maybe a lifetime of stings to dull the sting reflex. By now. The sun is dipping lower, staining the mud hives a deep gold. The bees are quieter, still adjusting to their new temporary lodging. The keeper sets the basket near an empty hive, knowing the queen will wander in, and the rest will follow in their unwavering loyalty. He shrugs at you, a silent "that's it" gesture, as though this whole delicate ballet is just another Tuesday for him. As you walk back toward the river path, the hum lingers in your ears. You think about how, in this world without mechanical clocks, seasons aren't marked by dates on a wall, but by the scent in the air, the sound of wings, the behavior of creatures you depend on. Swarming season is both disruption and renewal, a slow reminder that nothing here is ever truly still. And while you probably wouldn't survive a day handling this many bees bare-handed, you find yourself oddly soothed by the idea that, for the Egyptians, this was just another piece of the years-long, buzzing rhythm. Asterisk, asterisk, you're up early the next day. Not because the sun is up though, it is but because the village has a different kind of murmur this morning. The bees are calm, but the people aren't. There's a quiet buzz of talk that carries from hive to hearth. One of the hives collapsed in the night, not in a catastrophic, bees flinging to the next province kind of way, but enough to set tongues wagging. And here, in ancient Egypt, that's not just a beekeeping problem, it's an omen. You follow the beekeeper from yesterday as he ambles toward the fallen hive. He doesn't look too concerned, but a group of neighbors trails behind him, whispering like they've just spotted a crocodile in the irrigation canal. You can make out snippets of what they're saying, words about bad luck, about the bees being angry with the household, even about the gods withdrawing their favor. This is where superstition hums just as loudly as the bees themselves. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly believed bees carried divine messages, or if that was more poetic language carved into temple walls for ceremonial flair. Either way, standing here, watching a woman press a string of protective amulets into the beekeeper's hand, you can see how easy it would be to think of bees as a barometer for your fortune. The amulets themselves are small, bees cast in bronze or faience, their wings outstretched as if mid-flight. Some have tiny drilled holes so they can be strung and worn. Others are meant to hang above a doorway or rest on a shelf near the hive. The idea is simple. A happy bee means a happy household, and if your hive collapses, well, better start stringing more amulets. The beekeeper squats beside the hive remains, examining the cracked mud shell. A few bees wander in and out, confused but still loyal. He gestures for a boy to fetch extra clay, and within minutes, repairs are underway. But before the clay touches the hive, the boy sprinkles a pinch of crushed herbs into the entrance to mask the human scent, partly because someone's grandmother swore it kept away evil eyes. You glance toward the riverbank where an older man is tying a strip of linen to a tamarisk branch. The linen has been dipped in honey, left to dry, and then blessed by a local priest. It's one of those rituals that blurs the line between agriculture and magic. Supposedly, it coaxes wandering swarms back home. You can't help picturing the bees coming across it like a welcome home banner. And then there's the oddest bit. The beekeeper's wife steps forward with a clay jar of water. She pours it in a slow circle around the repaired hive, murmuring something under her breath. It's not for the bees. Water poured on the ground won't help them much. It's for the earth spirits, or so the story goes. Give them a little offering, keep the ground under the hives content, and the bees will have no reason to leave. You can't help smirking when you realize how much of this is just human nature, when your livelihood depends on something as small and unpredictable. As an insect, you grab onto any tradition that makes you feel like you have a little more control. If that means tying ribbons, whispering charms, or planting marigolds because my cousin's cousin swears bees like them, then so be it. The repairs finish, the herbs are in place, and the circle of water has soaked into the dust. The crowd disperses slowly, as if waiting to see if the bees will immediately signal their approval. They don't, of course. They're bees, not actors in a street play, but there's a subtle change in mood. People are smiling again, nodding at each other. The crisis, at least for today, feels managed as you wander back past other hives. You notice little signs of superstition everywhere once you start looking. A carved bee painted in ochre above. A doorway, a line of flat stones leading up to a hive entrance. Small bundles of dried flowers hanging from the rafters of a shed. None of it makes the honey sweeter or the wax softer, but it makes the people calmer. And maybe that's the real point. By midday, the beekeeper is back to his slow, careful rhythm, as if nothing happened. Bees drift in the sunlight, unconcerned with omens or blessings, focused entirely on nectar and the intricate architecture of their combs. You feel the warm air settle again, the hum smoothing out, and you realize that for all the charms and whispered prayers, the bees have their own logic, one that predates humans and will outlast them, no matter how many get strung along the way. You're sitting in the shade of a mud brick wall now, legs stretched out, listening to the faint, steady buzz drifting from the hives. It's the kind of sound that blurs into the background, like the soft hum of a ceiling fan in a summer bedroom. Only this isn't just about keeping the bees content. This is about tasting what all that quiet work has produced. The beekeeper you've been following all this time squats beside a large jar, tapping its side with the flat of his palm. You recognize the jar. It's one of the heavy clay ones, sealed with a thick layer of wax and mud. Inside, the honey has been stored away for weeks, settling, darkening, thickening until it's more treasure than food. Today is a taste day, though calling it that undersells the slow ritual about to unfold. He wedges a narrow reed tool into the seal, prying gently until the top pops with a faint crack. Immediately, the air around you changes. The scent is deep and floral, with a faint bite of something wild, maybe from desert blossoms, maybe from lotus flowers near the river. The smell alone could keep you here for hours. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians classified honey by type or simply by color and season. Some surviving jars are labeled in hieroglyphs, but whether that meant best for the gods or best for your sore throat is unclear. Either way, this honey gleams like amber in the late sun, and it's treated with a level of care you might reserve for a rare spice. The first taste is not taken by the beekeeper himself, but by a small boy, likely his son, who dips a carved wooden spoon just deep enough to pull out a ribbon of honey. He lifts it, lets it catch the light, then tastes it without a word. You wait for a verdict, but the boy just nods slowly, eyes half closed, and hands the spoon back. This is approval, ancient Egyptian style. You notice the process is almost like wine tasting. There's a pause, a murmur between family members, a comparison to the last jar opened. Someone says something about lotus-heavy sweetness, and another mentions desert herbs. They're not just eating, they're judging, remembering, ranking. For people whose lives are tied to the river, the soil, and the seasons, flavor is a record of the year's conditions. Then comes the quirky part. You watch as the beekeeper pours a thin trickle of honey onto a flat piece of polished stone, spreading it with a reed. A woman steps forward, holding a shallow bronze dish, and they set the stone in the sun. This is not to warm it for eating it, to watch how it spreads and moves. Some say it's a way to tell if the honey has crystallized or been watered down. Others insist it's part of an old belief that the way the honey moves reveals the temperament of the hive it came from. Within minutes, the air around the stone fills with curious bees. No one swats them away, they're allowed to taste their own handiwork. You can't help but think of it like a baker letting their own nose hover over the oven. The tasting moves indoors, into the cool dimness of the house, where clay lamps flicker against the walls. Here, honey is drizzled over small cakes made from barley and figs. It's also spooned into cups of warm, lightly fermented date beer, an odd combination, but one that turns the drink into something smoother, less sharp. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptians used specific flavor notes of honey in religious offerings, or if any clean jar would do. What's certain is that some of the finest honey was sealed and sent to temples, where priests used it in libations, medicinal mixes, or as part of embalming rituals. The idea that a bee's work could accompany someone into the afterlife is strangely poetic and slightly unsettling if you start thinking about just how much honey might have been wasted on the dead instead of the living. Outside, the tasting continues in a more casual way. People scoop honey straight from the jar with bits of bread, laugh softly, and compare it to last year's harvest. You notice one man swears this batch is luckier because the bees nested near a stand of papyrus that year. Luckier for whom? He doesn't say. Maybe the bees, maybe the eaters. By the time the jar is resealed, you feel like you've been part of something half feast, half ceremony. The bees, for their part, are still at work, unbothered by human judgments. They'll keep making more, unaware that people are sipping, swirling, and comparing their creations like connoisseurs of something far fancier. You walk away with the taste lingering on your tongue, thinking it's entirely possible this is the best boring history snack you'll ever have. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. By now, the year feels different. The sun is lower on the horizon, and the once busy riverbanks are quieter. You walk the same dusty path you've taken for weeks, past the same mud hives. But the sound has changed. The hum is softer, less insistent, like a market at the end of the day when most stalls are already packed up. You notice fewer people at the hives, too. There's still the occasional inspection, the occasional jar sealed and tucked away, but the urgency is gone. Honey season is over, and with it, a certain tempo in village life. The bees are still working. Of course, they don't take holidays, but their role in the rhythm of human affairs is shrinking as the year turns. It's not just the season, though you've been hearing whispers from the traders at the dock stories about shifting winds in Egyptian life itself. The pharaoh has new interests. The priests are favoring different temple offerings, and foreign merchants are bringing in goods that change what's valued and what's traded. Historians still argue whether this slow drift was due to climate changes, political shifts, or simple human fickleness. What's certain is that beekeeping's place in the grand machine of Egypt is subtly changing. You find yourself walking with an old beekeeper who's been at this longer than anyone in the village can remember. His hands are leathery, his beard more white than black, and his eyes have that faraway look of someone who's seen more seasons than he can count. He tells you that when he was young, temple demands for honey were constant, almost urgent. Whole rafts of jars would be floated, a privet to feed ceremonies, to see the priests' voices, to seal sacred scrolls. Now, he says, the temples still want honey, but not as much hand, not always Egyptian. Imported honey, he mutters, shaking his head as if the words taste bad. You glance at the hives, their entrances quiet in the midday heat, and you wonder how many of them will be repaired next spring, and how many will be left to crumble. The old man gestures toward the desert edge, where wild bees still make their homes in rock crevices. He says some keepers have stopped trying to maintain hives altogether, preferring to harvest from wild colonies instead of shorter-term gain, but one that requires no year-round tending. There's a quirky story going around, maybe true, maybe not, about a nobleman who decided to replace all his hives with imported oil jars from the Levant, filling them with fragrant oils for trade instead of honey. His family still kept a few hives for old time's sake, but mostly as a kind of garden decoration, like a noble today keeping a koi pond. You can almost hear the collective sigh of bees everywhere. The river, once a steady highway for jars of honey, now carries more pottery, more copper ingots, more bolts of linen. Honey shipments still happen, but they're folded into mixed cargo instead of commanding entire barges. And with fewer long-distance honey trades, there's less reason for ambitious keepers to expand their apiaries. You walk past a hive that's been partially collapsed for months. Grass is starting to grow through the cracks, and a lizard darts across its surface, tail flicking. The hum here is faint, just a handful of bees still using it as a way station. No one seems in a hurry to rebuild it. It's not abandonment, exactly. It's more like the slow fading of a song when the musicians wander off stage one by one. Even so, beekeeping hasn't vanished. It's just quieter now, folded into the background of Egyptian life instead of standing at the center of certain rituals and trades. Families still tend a few hives. Children still get sticky fingers from dipping bread into fresh comb, and wax still finds its way into lamps and amulets. But it's no longer the humming engine of economy or ceremony it once was. As the evening cools, you hear a few bees still working the last of the season's blossoms. They don't seem to know or care that their role in human affairs is shrinking. They've been here longer than pharaohs, longer than temples, and they'll be here long after those names are forgotten. You find that oddly comforting, even if it makes you feel very small. Asterisk, asterisk. The sky is pale gold this morning, the kind of light that makes the Nile look almost molten. You're standing at the edge of the beekeeper's yard, watching him seal a jar for what might be the last time this season. It's a slow, deliberate process. First a layer of wax, smoothed carefully over the mouth, then a layer of mud to keep the wax cool and safe. When it's done, he presses a small mark into the mudder personal sign, just enough to tell this jar from the rest it strikes. How final the gesture feels. This isn't just closing a container. It's tucking away the summer's work, wrapping up the hum of countless wings in a single, silent vessel. You imagine this jar months from now, opened in a quiet kitchen, or carried on a reed boat to another village, or maybe set aside as an offering in a dimly lit temple. The hives themselves are quiet today. The air is cooler, the bees moving more slowly. You step closer and hear a faint hum inside, but it's more like a gentle purr now than the roaring chorus of midsummer. The beekeeper doesn't look sad, he's seen too many cycles for that. But there's a softness in the way. He runs his hand along the hive's surface, like you might pat an old friend who's about to rest for a while. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians kept their bees year-round in the same hives, or moved them to warmer spots during the cooler months. The records are scattered, a mix of art, stray notes, and the occasional archaeologist's lucky find. But whatever the logistics, the rhythm was the same. A long season of buzzing work, then a quiet season of waiting. The quirky part, there are stories, half myth, half gossip, of jars of honey sealed and forgotten in storage pits, only to be found decades later still perfectly edible. Some say this was intentional, a way of leaving a gift for future generations. Others think it was just human forgetfulness. Either way, the idea that honey could outlast the people who made it feels both eerie and comforting. You wander along the row of hives one last time, noticing small cracks in the mud, bits of wax left behind, the occasional bee making a lazy circuit in the sun. The keeper is inside now, storing the last sealed jar on a shelf lined with amphorae and baskets. You picture him in months to come, reaching for one, breaking the seal, and letting that trapped summer scent escape into a winter room. And as you step away, the village behind you already feels quieter. The bees will keep to their own pace, the river will keep flowing, and somewhere in the dark of a storeroom, the last jar of the season will wait, patient as stone. You have the strange sense that, once sealed, it belongs less to the people who made it and more to time itself. The hum fades as you walk toward the river path. You think about how this whole journey, weeks of watching, listening, and following, has been a kind of slow exhale. You started in the heat of the swarming season, and now you're ending in this cool, hushed moment. There's no grand finale, just a gentle settling, the way a song sometimes ends on a single soft note instead of a crash of drums. You slow your steps now, letting the images stretch out. The river's surface is glassy, catching the last light as the sun sinks behind the western bank. The air smells faintly of silt and distant cooking fires, and somewhere, far behind you, a hive lets out one last drowsy murmur. You picture the bees inside, tucked into their comb, each cell a tiny chamber of warmth. In the quiet, you remember the jars you've seen sealed, the chants and amulets, the slow swirl of honey on a spoon, the way swarming clouds would darken the air. You think about how human hands shaped clay and coaxed insects, how seasons and rituals folded into each other without rush. Your breath falls into the same slow rhythm as the river. You can almost feel yourself sinking into that same patience, that same gentle pace. The bees will go on, the hives will wait, and somewhere in the dark, that last jar of the year will keep its golden heart, unspoiled until the moment it's opened. And with that thought, the hum slips away completely, leaving only the night air, the river, and the soft sound of your own footsteps fading into stillness. Hey guys, tonight we ease into a journey that will probably take us longer to tell than Ashoka's entire reign actually lasted. The lamps of the Mauryan court are flickering, The corridors are lined with carved stone lions, and you find yourself walking in slow, measured steps toward the room where a boy asks, that boy who will one day be Emperor Ashoka's, trying to balance on the back of an elephant calf that is clearly not cooperating. His world is already too big for him. You can almost hear the clatter of bronze bowls in the kitchens, the rustle of silk robes, the far-off murmur of 1,000 courtiers all trying to outwhisper each other about which prince might end up ruling this enormous empire. And here you are, in the middle of it, watching a restless young mind grow in the shadow of towering walls and bigger expectations. You probably won't survive this without drifting off at least twice before we get to the juicy bits. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in Pataliputra, the Mauryan capital, is a little heavy tonight, carrying the scent of damp earth after a brief monsoon drizzle. You walk past torchlit courtyards where guards stand with spears, barely moving except for the slow blink of someone who's been on duty since before the moon rose. Inside, the palace sprawls in all directions, thong-pillared halls, rooms draped with embroidered curtains, storage chambers stacked with jars of grain and baskets of fruit. Somewhere in all that grandeur is Ashoka, not yet the fearsome name he will become. Just another royal child in a very large and competitive family. His father, Bimbisara, is the emperor, now a man known for keeping the empire stable, even if he's not quite as dazzling as his own father, Chandragupta Maurya, the founder of this sprawling dynasty. To you, Bimbisara seems like the type who would prefer long, predictable meetings about irrigation systems over sudden bursts of military adventure. But he is still the emperor, and his many children, born from multiple queens and consorts, all live under the same vast roof of expectation. Ashoka, even as a boy, does not fit neatly into the palace mold. He's restless, his energy often redirected into physical challenges rather than courtly decorum. One day, you might find him practicing with a bow, the next arguing with a riding instructor about whether the elephant should be encouraged with a sharp sound or a soft word. Historians still argue whether his early stubbornness was seen as a strength or a flaw in those days. But you can tell it marked him apart from the very beginning. The mornings in his youth begin with a mix of military drills and lessons in politics, although lessons often mean a tutor reciting long passages about treaties, while the young prince's mind wanders to the sparrows hopping along the palace wall. You sit with him under the shade of a neem tree, listening to a lecture about how to manage the affairs of distant provinces. He's only half listening, absently drawing little elephants in the dirt with a stick. And then, of course, there are the other princes. So many princes. Older brothers, younger brothers, cousins. The palace feels less like a family home and more like a slow-moving chess game. Everyone is a piece on the board, and every move, every friendship, every rivalry means something in the long run. Ashoka's relationship with his siblings is complicated. With some, he shares jokes during meals, flicking crumbs at each other when the attendants aren't looking. With others, the tension is so thick that even the most polite greetings are heavy with unspoken competition. The courtyard training grounds are where Ashoka's energy finds its outlet. You can almost hear the thud of wooden practice swords, the grunts of effort, the barked commands from instructors who have seen generations of Mauryan princes pass through these same drills. Ashoka's form isn't flawless sometimes. He overeats, lunging with more enthusiasm than precision. But there's a focus in his eyes that the teachers notice. One grizzled old guard mutters to another that this boy might be more dangerous than his polished, rule-following brothers. Outside the palace walls, the Mauryan Empire stretches over a huge portion of the Indian subcontinent, a patchwork of cultures, climates, and local rulers who all send tribute to Ptah. It's a realm of caravan routes thick with dust, of river barges carrying grain and sandalwood, of small village markets where no one has ever seen the emperor but everyone feels the weight of his taxes. Ashoka, at this stage, sees very little of it firsthand. His world is still mostly marble floors, carved columns, and the occasional excursion into the hunting grounds. One of those hunts becomes a story the palace servants whisper for days. The young prince, eager to prove himself, charges after a wild boar before the others are ready. His horse stumbles, Ashoka rolls into the dirt, and for a brief moment, the royal boy is just a tangle of limbs and laughter, covered in dust, with his attendants scrambling to help. It's not exactly a tale of heroic conquest, but it becomes part of the quiet legend of his youth, a reminder that he is both bold and a little reckless at night. The palace is quieter, though never silent. Somewhere, a musician plucks a slow tune on a veena. Servants shuffle past with trays of betel leaves. You sit with Ashoka on the edge of a balcony, looking out over the darkened city. The torches along the main streets make glowing threads in the distance, like rivers of light winding through the sleeping capital. He asks questions about the empire, how far it stretches, what lies beyond its borders, and you can sense the beginnings of a curiosity that will later drive his decisions as emperor. The palace cats, sleek and entitled, wander between your feet as the night breeze picks up. You can smell the faint smoke of incense wafting from the nearby temple. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl calls. It's easy to forget that beyond these walls, life is harsher, messier, and less forgiving. But for now, you remain in this cushioned cocoon of imperial youth, the slow, steady drip of destiny gathering in the background, and so Ashoka grows, not just in height and strength, but in the awareness that his life is not entirely his own. He belongs to the empire, to the expectations of his lineage, and to a game of power that is already being played around him. The sun rises over Patalipatra with a pale gold light, spilling slowly into the courtyards and catching the polished tips of the palace's stone columns. You wake to the soft clink of bronze vessels being carried to the training grounds. Somewhere nearby, an elephant lets out a low, rumbling sigh, like it's already tired of the day ahead. Ashoka is not far from it. He's being hauled from bed by attendants who know better than to let a prince sleep through his training. Training, after all, is not optional in the Mauryan court. If you're a royal son, you are expected to learn how to rule and how to fight. And if you're Ashoka, you're expected to excel, because whether anyone says it aloud or not, the emperor's eyes are often on you. The training ground is a flat expanse of packed earth, ringed with wooden posts and shaded in places by wide, leafy trees. In one corner, you see racks of spears, swords, and bows. Another corner holds a small herd of horses, stamping and swishing their tails. And beyond them, a few elephants stand, tethered, already decked out with their practice saddles. Ashoka's morning begins with the bow. He stands before the target, string taut, arrow ready. His tutor, a lean man with a weathered face, watches closely, The first shot thunks into the outer ring, decent, but not impressive. The second arrow sinks closer to the center. By the third, the tutor grunts approval, which, in this environment, is basically the same as a warm embrace. Then come the sword drills. Wooden blades clack in the air as Ashoka steps forward, strikes, sidesteps, and parries. His movements are faster than his brothers, less graceful than the tutor might like, but sharper, as if there's an edge of impatience behind every swing. Historians still argue whether this impatience made him a more decisive commander later in life, or simply a more dangerous one. After weapons practice comes mounted training. Ashoka is already comfortable on horseback. He grips the reins loosely, guiding the animal through tight turns around the posts. But it's the elephant training that everyone dreads, especially the elephants. Ashoka climbs onto the back of a young bull, the animal swaying under his weight, its leathery skin warm beneath his bare feet. The trainer barks instructions. The elephant ignores half of them. Somewhere between the third and fourth lap, Ashoka leans forward and mutters something directly into its ear. No one hears the words, but the elephant suddenly lumbers into motion with surprising speed. One servant later swears the prince bribed the animal with a promise of extra sugarcane. Once the physical training is done, the truly exhausting part begins. Lessons in governance. You're herded into a shaded veranda where scrolls and palm leaf manuscripts lie stacked in neat piles. Ashoka sits cross-legged on a reed mat, his tutors explaining trade routes, taxation systems, and the fine art of not letting a provincial governor get too powerful. Outside, you can hear the call of a koel bird, long and lazy, like it's mocking the endless droning of human voices. The empire, Ashoka learns, is a living organism. Its lifeblood is the grain from fertile river valleys, the spices from coastal ports, the iron from inland mines. All of it has to flow smoothly to the capital, or things start to crack. The tutors describe rebellions in far-off provinces, uprisings put down before they could spread. They mention how quick communication can make or break an emperor's hold on power. You catch Ashoka glancing toward the window, as if picturing himself on one of those long, dusty roads, moving faster than any message could. Afternoons bring a change of pace, or at least a change of scenery. Sometimes it's hunting expeditions, sometimes chariot races, sometimes sparring matches between the royal brothers. The races are the most competitive. The chariots, rattling over the track, send clouds of dust into the hot air. And it's not unusual for a wheel to splinter mid-run. Ashoka is rarely the most polished driver, but he's determined, clinging to the reins even when the ride turns wild. Not all training is martial. There are also lessons in diplomacy, how to listen without agreeing, how to promise without committing, how to make an ally feel important without actually giving them more power. These are the subtler arts, and Ashoka seems to pick them up quickly, perhaps too quickly for the liking of certain court ministers in the evenings. The family gathers for meals in a hall lit by hundreds of oil lamps. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat, lentils, rice, and fresh mangoes. Servants circulate with trays, refilling cups with spiced wine or cool water. The conversation at these meals is rarely casual. It's a mix of polite inquiries and veiled boasts. One brother might remark on the fine horses in his province, another on the taxes collected this season. Ashoka tends to stay quiet unless he has something worth saying, which ironically often makes the others pay more attention when he finally does speak. It's during one of these meals that a traveling general tells a story from the empire's northwestern frontier. A minor skirmish with a neighboring power, resolved quickly but with a show of force. Ashoka listens intently, asking just enough questions to keep the story going. The general leaves the conversation slightly unsettled, muttering later that the young prince's eyes are too sharp for his age. And yet, for all this structured preparation, there's a restlessness in Ashoka that no schedule can pin down. Late at night, he'll slip away from his attendants to walk the quieter courtyards alone. You follow him past still fountains and moonlit colonnades, his footsteps echoing softly on the stone. Once, you find him in the stables, leaning against his horse's flank, tracing patterns in the dust with his boot. He doesn't look up when you approach, just says, "They think they're teaching me how to rule, but they're really teaching me how to wait." It's a truth that sits heavy in the air. His training is about control, not just of armies and provinces, but of himself. Every drill, every lecture, every staged hunt is a slow layering of discipline over instinct. But you can tell that under it all, the instinct is still there, alive and impatient, waiting for the moment it will be allowed to move. The first posting comes not with a fanfare, but with a dry decree read out in the council chamber. You're standing near the back as a minister clears his throat and announces that Prince Ashoka will take up the governorship of Avanti, a western province known for its fertile black soil, slow rivers, and a capital city that has not seen a major rebellion in, well, longer than anyone in the room can recall. You might expect some dramatic scene of departure, but this is the Mauryan Empire. Things are big, slow, and heavily wrapped in procedure. A week is spent packing scrolls, measuring grain for the journey, selecting the right number of guards, attendants, and because this is still the royal household comfort items, like polished bronze mirrors and extra cushions, the trip itself is a plodding caravan. You trudge beside Ashoka as oxen pull carts loaded with supplies. The summer air is heavy, carrying the mixed scents of dust and blooming jasmine. The road is lined with banyan trees whose long aerial roots sway gently in the breeze. At night, the campfires, the darkness, their smoke curling into a sky that feels too big for the human plans playing out beneath it. When you arrive in Ujjaini, the provincial capital of Avanti, it's nice, pleasant, even, which is another way of saying there's nothing here to satisfy the restlessness in Ashoka's bones. The city is clean, the market stalls orderly. Merchants sell dyed cloth in soft reds and yellows, baskets of turmeric and cumin, jars of clarified butter. Farmers bring in their produce from nearby villages: fat, cucumbers, mangoes still green, piles of lentils measured in careful heaps. His duties as governor begin with ceremony. The local elders bow, offer garlands, and recite the formal greetings. Ashoka responds with the kind of patience that suggests he's counting how many words each elder will use before getting to the point. Then come the petitions requests for tax adjustments, irrigation repairs, disputes over grazing rights. Most are settled quickly. Others are referred back to the council. There is a rhythm to provincial life, and it moves at the speed of oxen in mud. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's time in Avanti was meant as a test of his administrative skills or as a way to keep him out of the more volatile centers of power. Either way, it's a lesson in monotony. You spend long afternoons in the governor's hall, the air thick with the smell of ink as scribes bend over palm leaf documents. The clatter of abacus beads punctuates the silence. Ashoka listens. 2 reports on grain storage levels, the condition of roads, the timeliness of tax payments. One particularly thrilling afternoon involves recalculating the levy on a fishing village, because last year's catch was unusually high. Occasionally, you accompany him on inspection tours. These are slow circuits through the countryside visiting irrigation, canals, granaries, and small shrines shaded by ancient trees. The villagers greet the governor with cautious respect, offering bowls of fresh milk or handfuls of dates. Ashoka accepts these with a polite nod, his eyes scanning the horizon as if looking for something the maps haven't shown him. There's one trip where the monotony is broken, at least a little. A merchant caravan from the northwest arrives, bringing lapis lazuli, fine wool, and stories of lands far beyond the empire's borders. Over a cup of spiced wine, one trader describes mountains so high their peaks vanish into clouds, and valleys where rivers run so cold they numb your hands in seconds. Ashoka listens intently, but when the merchant offers to bring him along on the next journey, the governor smiles and shakes his head. "Not yet," he says. The words are polite, but you can hear the faint crack of longing in them. Most days, the liveliest moments come in the evenings. Ashoka has taken to walking the streets of Ujjayini in plain clothes, accompanied by only a single guard. He stops at tea stalls, chats with potters, watches the dice games at the edge of the market. The people don't always recognize him. He's just another tall man in simple linen, asking questions about their work, their harvests, their children. One old fisherman, unaware of who he's speaking to, tells Ashoka exactly what he thinks. Of those city officials who raise taxes without fixing the roads. Ashoka laughs quietly and promises to mention it to someone. The climate here is softer than in Pataliputra. The monsoon arrives with heavy, satisfying rains that drum on the tiled roofs for hours. The fields drink deeply, turning a rich, lush green. On such days, the governor's hall grows dim and work slows. You find Ashoka standing at the veranda, watching the sheets of water turn the streets into shallow streams. He says nothing, but you can see the weight of stillness pressing on him. Quirky tidbit in Avante. There's a local tradition of marking the end of the rainy season with a festival where people release tiny clay boats carrying small oil lamps down the river. Ashoka joins one year, setting his own lamp afloat. It drifts for a while, wobbling in the current, before tipping and going dark. He laughs, not because it's funny, but because it feels like the perfect metaphor for his time here set afloat, with ceremony drifting gently, and then nothing dramatic at all. Months turn into years. Reports continue to be written, taxes continue to be collected, and the province remains, blessedly, maddeningly calm. Ashoka grows more patient, more methodical. But you notice his gaze often lingering on the horizon, toward the east, where news from the capital comes in slow. Deliberate waves, then one morning, a messenger arrives, dusty from the road, bearing a sealed letter from Pataliputra. Ashoka reads it silently, folds it carefully, and says only, "It seems the quiet is over." You don't know yet what's coming, but you can feel the air shift, as if the slow, predictable rhythm of Avanti has just been tapped by a much faster beat. The war council chamber is heavy with the scent of sandalwood, incense, and worn leather scroll cases. You step inside alongside Ashoka, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes, some curious, some cautious, and a few openly skeptical, settling on the young prince who's barely been allowed more than a shadowy presence in these halls until now. The long wooden table groans under the weight of maps, battle plans, and piles of official correspondence. The empire is at a crossroads. Binjasara's health continues to decline, and with it, the unity of the Mauryan court. A rebellion simmers. In the eastern provinces, and nearby neighbors are watching hungrily for any sign of weakness. Susama, Ashoka's eldest brother and the presumptive heir, is officially in charge of quelling the unrest, but whispers suggest his leadership is less than inspiring. The generals grow restless, unsure whether to rally behind the aging emperor's choice or to consider alternatives. Ashoka listens quietly as the generals argue. The debate stretches on, thick with military jargon and cautious accusations. Supplies need to be gathered, reinforcements sent, alliances secured. You notice Ashoka's fingers tapping softly on the table's carved edge, a steady rhythm amid the tension. When he finally speaks, his voice is calm but deliberate, a rare blend of authority and humility. He suggests a strategic approach that blends force with diplomacy, proposing a smaller, more mobile force rather than a massive, unwieldy army. Some generals nod slowly, others bristle. A sharp-eyed commander challenges the idea, saying it's too risky to spread forces thin. Ashoka counters gently, pointing out that speed and flexibility could outmaneuver the rebels before they gather strength. The room falls silent for a moment. It's clear this is more than just military strategy. It's a subtle test of Ashoka's ability to lead and to convince. After the council breaks up, you follow Ashoka through the palace corridors. The murmurs and sideways glances have increased, but there's also a new kind of respect. Even those loyal to Susama are beginning to see Ashoka as someone who might actually get things done. But it's not just military matters occupying his mind. The empire's future is tangled in family politics, and the slow game of court alliances is as dangerous as any battlefield. You see Ashoka meet privately with ministers and palace officials, listening more than speaking, but carefully, noting alliances and grudges. One whispered conversation reveals plans to secure the loyalty of key provincial governors through marriage ties and favors. Quirky tidbit: a palace servant confides that Ashoka once tried to sneak a pet monkey into the war council room, hoping to lighten the mood. The plan was foiled when the monkey escaped and caused a minor commotion by stealing a general's helmet. This story circulates quietly among the servants, a rare glimpse of levity in otherwise tense times. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's rise to power was a calculated maneuver or a fortunate series of events shaped by circumstance. What you can tell is that he is learning, fast absorbing lessons in patience, persuasion, and the long game of power that extends beyond swords and spears. As the weeks pass, Ashoka's role grows. He oversees the training of troops, ensuring discipline and readiness. He visits the eastern provinces, speaking with local leaders to gauge the true mood on the ground. His presence is both reassuring to some and threatening to others. One night, you join him on the palace terrace. The city below is quiet, lights flickering like fireflies. Ashoka gazes out at the horizon, voice soft as he says, "This empire is a living thing, always shifting. To hold it, I must become part of that movement, not just a watcher." The moment is both a confession and a vow. He knows the crown will not come easily, but he is ready to claim it slowly, carefully, and with all the patience of a man who has learned to wait. The coronation unfolds in the cool, early morning hours, long before the sun has fully claimed the sky. You find yourself amidst the grand marble halls of Pataliputra, where the scent of sandalwood mingles with fresh lotus blossoms scattered across polished floors. The walls are alive with flickering shadows cast by thousands of oil lamps, their soft glow reflecting in the gold and crimson banners hanging from the balconies. Ashoka stands at the center of it all, draped in regal robes that feel both heavy and unfamiliar. The weight of the crown atop his head presses down like the accumulated hopes and fears of an empire not yet fully at peace. It's a moment steeped in ceremony and tradition, so slow-moving that even the priest's chants seem to stretch longer than the patience of the assembled crowd. You watch as the high priest dips his fingers into a bowl of sacred water, slowly anointing Ashoka's forehead and shoulders, each movement deliberate and filled with ritual importance. The drums beat a steady, measured rhythm, steady enough to lull you into a light trance. If you let yourself drift, historians still argue whether Ashoka accepted the throne willingly, or was pushed forward by palace factions determined to install a more pliable ruler. But in this moment, none of that matters. The transition is complete, and the empire now rests on his shoulders. The courtiers bow deeply, their eyes flicking between Ashoka and one another, silently weighing the new emperor's worth. A few smile cautiously, while others mask skepticism. With polite nods, you sense a subtle undercurrent whispers that the real test has only just begun. The early days of Ashoka's rule are marked by a series of long, dull meetings. You sit with him through endless hours of petitions, where villagers complain about water rights and merchants haggle over tax rates. The grand vision of empire feels obscured by piles of paperwork and the steady drip of administrative chores. One afternoon, a minister presents a report on the state of the road network. Ashoka leans forward, studying the maps that show slow-moving caravans and crumbling bridges. The empire's arteries are clogged and fragile, and it will take years to repair them. Amid the bureaucratic monotony, Ashoka finds small moments of quiet rebellion stealing away to the palace gardens, where the only sound is the gentle rustling of palm fronds in the breeze. Here, beneath the dappled sunlight, he lets himself breathe, far from the heavy eyes of the court. Quirky tidbit: the new emperor develops a habit of writing short notes on scraps of palm leaf and leaving them tucked inside the cushions of his favorite garden bench. These notes range from thoughtful reflections on leadership to playful jabs at his more pompous ministers, who have no idea their antics are being quietly mocked. Despite the slow grind of ruling, Ashoka's mind is already turning toward larger ambitions. He knows that holding the empire together requires more than just managing paperwork. Demands a vision, a philosophy that can unite a diverse and sprawling realm. You can almost hear the wheels turning in his head as he contemplates how to wield power not just with the sword, but with wisdom and justice. The crown may be heavy, but it is also a promise to himself and to the millions who live under his reign. The days blend into weeks, and weeks into months, as Ashoka settles into the slow, grinding routine of imperial rule. You're with him in the throne room, where the echoes of petitions and pleas seem to bounce endlessly off the carved stone walls. It's not the dramatic battlefield or stirring speech you might expect from an emperor. Instead, it's a constant drip of issues: a widow seeking land rights, a merchant disputing a tax assessment, a farmer complaining about a broken irrigation canal. Ashoka listens, nodding with a mix of patience and weariness. The mantle of empire reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in the humdrum cadence of governance. It's a relentless flow, like a river that never quite stops. The tax collector's reports arrive regularly, detailing the flow of grain, silver, and goods into the Imperial treasury. You watch Ashoka pore over these ledgers, his brow furrowed as he balances the need for revenue against the risk of overburdening his subjects. There is a constant tension here how to keep the wheels turning without crushing the spokes. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's administration was more effective because of his reforms or despite them. What's clear is that the empire's bureaucracy was vast and complex, requiring endless correspondence, memoranda, and personal interventions from the emperor himself. The court becomes a theater of endless slow-motion negotiations. Ministers vie for influence, each meeting a dance of veiled threats and cautious alliances. Ashoka walks this tightrope with growing skill, using a combination of quiet diplomacy and the occasional firm decree to keep the peace. You join him on inspections of distant provinces where the long roads are lined with traders, farmers, and soldiers. Caravans lumber slowly across dusty plains, their drivers pausing for brief rest under wide trees. The empire is vast, and news travels at the pace of the slowest mule. One journey takes you through the Vindhya Mountains, where the air is cool, and the forests thick with chirping birds. You watch Ashoka speak with village elders, listening more than speaking, as they recount local customs and grievances. It's clear he values these moments, not just for their political importance, but as a reminder of the empire's human face. Quirky tidbit: Ashoka adopts a peculiar habit of marking important documents with a small stamp of alliances, personal emblem using a block of carved wood dipped in red dye. Some officials grumble that it's a childish affectation, but others swear it lends a certain gravitas to otherwise tedious decrees. Behind the scenes, the wheels of power turn slowly but inexorably toward conflict. Tensions with Kalinga, a fiercely independent eastern kingdom, have been simmering for years. The region's refusal to submit to Mauryan control is a constant thorn in the emperor's side. Ashoka's advisors urge caution. Some suggest a diplomatic approach, others hint at military action. The emperor, ever measured, weighs these options carefully. The empire demands order, but at what cost? As you walk alongside Ashoka through the palace halls, you notice a shadow crossing his face, a flicker of something unreadable. The burdens of empire are settling in, slow but unyielding. And so the days pass, filled with long meetings, tedious reports, and the quiet but persistent tension of an empire on the edge of change. The long, dusty roads stretch endlessly ahead as Ashoka's army begins its slow march toward Kalinga. You trudge alongside him, the sun beating down with a merciless heat, and the scent of dry earth mixed with sweat thick in the air. The soldiers move methodically, their footsteps stirring small clouds of dust that hang in the stillness like a curtain. The pace is slow to slow for restless hearts, but it's the way empires move, weighed down by logistics, supplies, and careful planning. The campaign isn't just about the clash of armies. It's a lesson in patience, in the steady accumulation of power. Campfires flicker every evening, and you hear tales exchanged in low voices, stories of distant villages, strange customs, and whispered fears about what this war might mean. Historians still debate how much Ashoka himself anticipated the battle's true cost before it began. Was he a commander eager for conquest, or a ruler resigned to the harsh necessities of empire? The truth feels as slow and tangled as the march itself. As the army approaches Kalinga, the terrain changes. The dusty plains give way to thick forests and winding rivers, each step deeper into territory that has resisted Mauryan rule for decades. You watch Ashoka study the land with a furrowed brow, his sharp eyes missing nothing from the wary movements of local scouts to the way the morning mist clings to the trees. Quirky tidbit to boost morale. A few soldiers bring along small musical instruments, flutes, and drums that fill the campsites with a steady, if slightly off-key, rhythm. One night, you catch Ashoka quietly tapping a drumbeat himself, a rare break from his usually stern demeanor. The battle itself is not a swift victory. Instead, it unfolds over days of slow, grinding conflict. You witness skirmishes that flare and fade, each one leaving a trail of exhaustion and uncertainty rather than glory. The ground is churned into mud, and the air thick with the acrid smell of smoke and fear. After the fighting, the silence is heavy. Ashoka walks among the ruins, the weight of loss pressing down on him like the humid air after a monsoon storm. The cost of victory is written in every shattered home and grieving family. This moment marks a turning point, not just in the campaign but in Ashoka's life. You sense the slow dawning of a deep remorse, a sadness that settles in like a long shadow stretching across the empire. The aftermath of the Kalinga War is unlike anything the empire has seen before. Ashoka returns to Pataliputra, changed not just in title, but in spirit. The city's familiar streets feel different under his feet, as if the weight of what happened is woven into every stone and whispered in every corner. You walk with him through the palace halls, where courtiers try to mask their relief that the fighting is over, but also their unease about the emperor's newfound somberness. Ashoka's eyes no longer sparkle with youthful ambition. Instead, they carry a quiet gravity, the kind that comes from seeing too much loss. Historians still argue how deeply Ashoka's remorse shaped his subsequent policies, but you can't help but notice the subtle shifts in his behavior. He spends hours in meditation, seeking guidance from Buddhist monks and scholars. His council meetings now include debates about moral governance and the responsibilities of power. One afternoon, Ashoka invites you to a private garden where the soft rustle of bamboo leaves and the gentle trickle of a koi pond offer a rare moment of peace. He speaks softly about the need for compassion and justice, the desire to build an empire not just ruled by force, but by ethical principles. Quirky tidbit: Ashoka becomes fascinated with a particular species of white elephant, rare creature, considered sacred. He adopts one as his personal symbol, believing it embodies purity and strength. The palace staff joke that the elephant receives better treatment than most of the royal ministers. The empire begins to reflect Ashoka's transformation. Edicts carved into stone pillars appear throughout the realm, preaching non-violence, religious tolerance, and care for the poor. The messages spread slowly but steadily, reaching far-flung villages and bustling cities alike. Despite these ideals, challenges remain. Ashoka must balance his vision with the realities of governing a vast and diverse empire. Some generals grumble about the new policies. Others fear that too much leniency will invite rebellion. You watch Ashoka navigate these tensions with a calm determination. He listens, debates, and sometimes concedes, but never wavers from his core belief in a just and peaceful rule. The slow unfolding of these changes marks one of the most unique and enduring legacies of his reign. What began as a restless prince's journey has evolved into something far greater: a slow, steady march toward a different kind of empire. Ashoka's empire begins to pulse with the rhythms of transformation, not just through his edicts, but in the everyday lives of its people. You walk the bustling streets of Pataliputra and beyond, feeling the subtle shifts in energy, the merchants trading spices with a new sense of fairness, the villagers tending their fields with a quieter hope, the great road networks receive renewed attention. Ashoka orders the repair and expansion of routes stretching from the Ganges plains to the far corners of the realm. You join him on inspection tours along these highways, where way stations offer shelter to weary travelers and travelers exchange news in multiple languages. It's a reminder that the empire is a vast tapestry woven from many threads. Historians still debate how much Ashoka's infrastructure projects were driven by practical governance versus his desire to promote unity and peace. Either way, the roads become the veins through which the empire's lifeblood flows, goods, ideas, and people moving steadily, slowly, but surely. Ashoka also initiates efforts to support the welfare of his subjects. Hospitals, wells, and rest houses spring up, especially along trade routes. You witness the slow construction of a new hospital funded by royal decree, where physicians trained in Ayurveda treat the sick with herbal remedies and gentle care. Yet, even as these projects progress, Ashoka faces resistance. Some nobles grumble about the cost. Others worry that too much generosity will weaken their own influence. The emperor handles these objections with a mixture of patience and quiet firmness, understanding that change, especially slow change, always breeds friction. Quirky tidbit: Ashoka develops a fascination with the art of letter writing, personally composing messages to distant governors and foreign rulers. His handwriting, though neat, is known to be slightly erratic, a fact that amuses his scribes, who often find corrections tucked into the margins. Religion and philosophy also play a growing role in Ashoka's reign. You observe him attending Buddhist ceremonies, engaging in thoughtful debates about ethics, and promoting a vision of spiritual tolerance that embraces diversity rather than suppressing it. This aspect of his rule is one of the slowest to take root, as centuries-old beliefs and local customs resist change. Still, Ashoka's persistence gradually fosters an atmosphere where multiple faiths can coexist, an ambitious experiment in unity through diversity. As the seasons pass, the empire continues its steady, deliberate transformation. Empire not just held together by force, but by a shared vision of harmony and care. Asterisk. The imperial court buzzes with the subtle undercurrents of diplomacy and intrigue as Ashoka extends his reach beyond the borders of his own vast realm. You accompany him as envoys arrive, bearing gifts and messages from far-flung kingdoms, curious, some wary, and others eager to forge alliances. Ashoka understands that the survival of his empire depends not only on internal stability, but also on its place in the wider world. His diplomatic efforts are slow, meticulous, and often understated, a stark contrast to the thunderous battles of his youth. Treaties are negotiated over months, sealed with ceremonies rich in symbolism and carefully choreographed gestures. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's foreign policy was more driven by genuine respect for other cultures or by pragmatic concerns to secure trade routes and prevent invasions. The answer probably lies somewhere in between. You watch as Ashoka hosts foreign dignitaries in the palace gardens, where lotus ponds shimmer under the sun and the scent of jasmine fills the air. The conversations are polite but measured, filled with veiled questions and thoughtful silences. It's a game of patience, where each side tests the other's intentions. Quirky tidbit: Ashoka develops a peculiar fascination with exotic animals, brought by envoys, especially peacocks and parrots. He keeps a small aviary in the palace, and you swear you catch him talking to the birds as if they're his closest advisors. Back at home, Ashoka's efforts to promote religious tolerance and social welfare are gaining traction but also sparking quiet opposition. Certain factions within the court see his policies as too idealistic, even dangerous. The tension simmers beneath the surface, a slow boil that threatens to erupt. One evening, you find Ashoka walking alone through the palace corridors, the shadows long and the silence heavy. He speaks softly about the weight of leadership, balance between vision and reality, hope and pragmatism. An empire is not built in a day, he says, and neither is peace. The slow, steady march of his reign continues, marked by small victories and quiet challenges. Through it all, Ashoka remains a figure of calm determination, an emperor shaped as much by contemplation as by conquest. Asterisk, asterisk. Time folds softly around the imperial capital as Ashoka's reign stretches into its middle years. You watch the seasons pass in their slow dance from the flush of spring blossoms to the golden haze of autumn harvest siege, bringing its own rhythm to the life of the empire. The daily grind of governance hums steadily beneath the changing skies. You find yourself alongside Ashoka in the cool shadow of the palace gardens, where the rustle of palm fronds blends with distant temple bells. Here, far from the court's intrigue, the emperor reflects on the nature of power and responsibility. His contemplations deepen, shaped by the quiet patience that has come to define his rule. The empire itself is a mosaic of peoples, languages, and beliefs. Ashoka works tirelessly to weave these threads into a tapestry strong enough to hold the weight of diverse cultures and conflicting interests. His policies promote education, health, and religious tolerance, each initiative a small step toward a more unified realm. Historians still debate the effectiveness of Ashoka's social reforms, noting that while ideals were lofty, implementation was uneven across the provinces. Some areas embraced the changes eagerly, while others resisted, clinging to established customs. You accompany Ashoka on one of his visits to a remote village, where locals welcome him with offerings of fruit and garlands. The simple exchanges reveal much about the distance between imperial edicts and daily realities, but also about the slow spread of new ideas. Quirky tidbit: Ashoka becomes fascinated by medicinal plants during these travels, often carrying samples back to the palace gardens. He insists on experimenting with herbal remedies, much to the bewilderment of his physicians as the years unfold. The emperor's image shifts from fierce warrior to wise ruler, from restless prince to compassionate sovereign. His legacy is built not in haste, but in the steady accumulation of small, deliberate acts. The empire hums with life and change, a vast organism growing stronger with each patient breath. Asterisk, asterisk, the soft glow of twilight filters through the palace windows as Ashoka contemplates his legacy. You stand beside him, watching the last light fade from the sky, a quiet reminder that even the longest reign must eventually yield to time. The empire, vast and varied, now carries the marks of his steady handroads rebuilt. Hospitals founded, laws etched into stone. Ashoka's thoughts turn often to the future beyond himself, beyond the throne. He envisions an empire where justice and compassion guide rulers, where diversity is not a threat but a strength. It's a vision slow to take root, but destined to outlast the flicker of any single life. Historians still debate how much of Ashoka's later policies were inspired by genuine spiritual awakening versus political necessity. But you sense that, for him, The two are deeply intertwined, each feeding the other in the quiet hours. Ashoka writes messages to far-off lands, promoting peace and mutual respect. His words travel slowly across deserts and mountains, carried by messengers who brave storms and bandits alike. Quirky tidbit: Ashoka once attempted to host a grand feast for representatives of various religions, but accidentally offended a visiting dignitary by serving a dish containing garlic taboo in that guest's tradition. The mishap was smoothed over with humor and several rounds of sweetmeats. Back in the capital, you watch as the emperor continues to engage personally with his subjects, listening to their stories, mediating disputes, and sometimes sharing a rare smile over a well-timed joke. The empire pulses with life and complexity, a living testament to the slow, patient work of governance. As night deepens, you feel the steady heartbeat of history beneath your feet, the enduring rhythm of a ruler who chose to shape his world not through haste, but through careful, deliberate steps. Asterisk. The years have settled like gentle dust over the empire, softening edges and smoothing rough places. You walk with Ashoka through the grand halls, now marked by the quiet dignity of time rather than the restless energy of youth. The weight of the crown no longer feels like a burden, but a familiar companion. The empire is vast, and its problems many, but the slow, deliberate reforms Ashoka championed have taken root in surprising ways. Roads once rutted and impassable now pulse with steady commerce. Hospitals provide relief where there was none. Religious festivals celebrate diversity rather than sow division. Historians still debate whether Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism was a deeply personal transformation or a strategic move to unify his subjects. What's clear is that his promotion of non-violence and compassion reshaped the cultural fabric of the subcontinent. You find Ashoka seated beneath a flowering mango tree, reading a letter from a distant governor. The letter speaks of peace treaties and local uprisings quelled with words rather than swords, a testament to the slow power of diplomacy. Quirky tidbit: Ashoka has taken to collecting tiny stones from places he visits, each one labeled and stored in a special box. The stones serve as silent reminders of the empire's vastness and the slow journey of connection. As twilight falls, the emperor speaks softly of legacy, not just in monuments or decrees, but in the lives touched by kindness and justice. An empire built on fear crumbles quickly, he muses. One built on care endures. You nod, feeling the truth of his words settle like a gentle cloak around the history you've witnessed. The slow, steady pulse of empire beats on, patient, resilient, and quietly magnificent. Asterisk. The final years of Ashoka's reign unfold with a calm that seems almost surreal after decades marked by turmoil and transformation. You walk the gardens one last time with the emperor, the air heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine and the soft chirping of evening crickets. The palace feels quieter now, its halls echoing less with the footsteps of ministers and more with the gentle rustle of leaves. Ashoka's face shows the lines of a life lived slowly but fully, its wrinkle a chapter in the long story of empire, war, remorse, and hope. His eyes, once sharp and restless, now carry a serene depth, as if he has finally made peace with the burdens of rule. You recall the early days, the young prince, eager for power, the battlefield shadows, the slow march through court intrigue. And now, here at the end, the man who has reshaped an empire through patience, reflection, and a steadfast commitment to compassion. The pillars engraved with his edicts stand as silent witnesses, their weathered surfaces glowing softly in the fading light. They preach tolerance, kindness, and the dignity of all beings. Ashoka embraced not just as ruler, but as human, quirky tidbit in his final years. Ashoka is said to have taken to wearing simple robes more often than royal finery, favoring comfort and humility over display, a surprising but fitting choice for an emperor who came to value inner peace. Historians still ponder the true impact of Ashoka's reign, whether his vision was realized fully, or if the empire's slow transformation was only the beginning of a longer journey. What remains undeniable is the mark he left on history, a reminder that even the largest empires can be shaped by quiet, deliberate hands. As the sun dips below the horizon, you feel the gentle closing of a chapter, not just of a reign, but of an era defined by the slow, patient work of building something greater than oneself. Asterisk, asterisk, the evening wraps itself gently around you, a soft blanket of quiet and calm that seems to hush the world into a gentle stillness. The story of Ashoka's life settles like dust in a sunbeam, each moment lingering just a little longer, as if inviting you to breathe a little deeper, to let your mind wander slowly through the winding paths of history. There is no rush here, only the gentle unfolding of time, the steady beating of a heart that chose patience over haste, compassion over conquest. You imagine the emperor in those final days, sitting quietly beneath a tree, watching the slow dance of leaves in the breeze, feeling the warmth of the sun fading into twilight. The empire he shaped lives on in the whispers of the wind, the slow turning of the seasons, and the countless lives touched by his vision. As you close your eyes, the heavy weight of history lifts, replaced by a soft lightness, a peaceful ending to a long journey, and with that, you drift slowly, gently into sleep. Asterisk.